This is Collaberate, and welcome, by the way. This is Collaberate to create managing assets efficiently and profitably. And I thought about this for a while, and I couldn't quite get into my head what approach absolutely we'd have to it. So I had a seance, and I talked to Archimedes, and I said, Ark, my old buddy, from 3 million years ago, wherever you were from, collaborate to create and managing assets efficiently. What is it? He said, well, George, you could almost separate them out into two subjects, but you cannot collaborate efficiently and profitably without prudent management of your assets. And he said, collaborating to create can be with a rival visual effects house, it can be with a blue chip client, it can be with a production company that has not had a green light from a broadcaster yet for an exciting project. It can be collaboration at all sorts of levels through computing. It could be using the Muppets, the virtual market for facilities. And I don't know if any of you have heard of that, but the Labour government got it done and it's now in trial at Pinewood, where you can, if you're a production company, you want rendering time, just do it via your iPhone. Organise it. So we are heading to an era of so much collaboration. Before we start, would you please make sure your phones are turned off? I once was playing cricket and I was playing at slip and I was next to the wicketkeeper and a chap was miles out of his ground. We appealed, "How's that?" Turned round to the umpire and he was texting to his girlfriend and said, "Pardon?" And we didn't get the decision, so please turn your mobile off. Okay, I'm your session chairman and my name's George Jarrett and I work as a freelance journalist and I also sit on the IBC Comms Committee where I specialise in masterclasses. Our session will see the three guys answer questions and make comments. This will leave enough time to hear from you in Q&A at the end. We want you to, really pound us with some good questions. But first, to help us understand a little bit about you, although it's dark, how many of you are looking to collaborate creatively and have found the management of your people and technology tricky in this respect? Yeah. Anybody agree with that? Okay, a couple of guys there, thank you. How many of you are London-based? Okay, very representative, very representative. How many of you are film and TV people by trade? Oh, how many of you are multimedia or games people by trade? Okay. How many of you are hard assassins then? How many of you are totally happy with the key technologies and workflows that you rely on? Not one person's put up their hand. So that leads us into a very exciting prospect of what these guys are going to say. Before I start the question, I'm going to introduce them to you. In this chair here, weighing in at 320 pounds, no he's not, is Gavin Graham of Double Negative. Gavin's worked at Double Negative for 10 of the last 11 years. As an effects artist and supervisor on projects like Stardust in 2012, was it? Oh, 2012. Sorry, I put a comma where I shouldn't. Twit. Harry Potter 6, and most recently Captain America. Since June, he has been helping oversee the 3D department, which now has over 600 staff. Whoa! Oh, you're Team Gavin, are you? Oh, are you making the sticks and rock with his name through them then? Thank you, we'll have them afterwards. And at the end, introducing Steve McPherson of Framestore. Steve is the Visual Effects CTO at Framestore. Gavin's title, by the way, is co-head of Double Negative's 3D division. Now, Steve's CV lists time with Cray Research, Autodesk, and 3 different job titles at Autodesk, by the way. Time with Jim Henson's Creature Shop, time at MPC, and time at Double Negative. And he joined Framestore 16 months ago from Autodesk, and his big claim to fame, which is pretty unusual around Soho, is he has been the head of film technology for 3 of Soho's giants. Double Negative, MPC, and Framestore. When Double Negative started, it had 15 people. It now has 600 in one department alone. So what a growth industry we're involved in. Okay, we're going to start off with a question to each person on the panel to set a broad agenda of what we're covering, not the same question. And I have not introduced Mike, and I'm about to do that. And I'm now going to get somebody to put me over the head with that, if I can. Mike is the head of digital systems at Burroughs, and he manages the pipeline digital systems and R&D team. Burroughs is an award-winning automotive visualization studio and digital agency, and it has 4 business locations. Mike has a dozen years of commercial CG experience, specialising in automotive visualization, as I just said, on behalf of the Ford Motor Company for the past decade. Keeping a blue chip client of that size for that long is an achievement in itself. He holds multiple awards for both creative and software development work, sits on the advisory boards of several software technology companies. Which ones? Oh, okay. And is a regular guest speaker at design visualization events where he's always keen to promote visual effects work in the design visualization sector. Mike's interests include 2D, 3D workflows, and globally efficient pipelines, and by interest he is a climber, we have discovered. So let's climb into these questions. Let's start with Steve. At our meeting there were a number of big issues tattooed in your mind, like power and cooling and massive implications of that higher frame rates for stereoscopic 3D and 4K and what they imply, and we'll come back to those later. But let's start with the way frame storage broadening its scope with respect to services provided to the film industry. From your point of view, and considering things like the relationship you have with Bournemouth University, how is the visual effects industry evolving creatively?
Well, I guess part of it is this fun?
Yes, well.
So Bournemouth is probably a good kicking off point, especially since we're moving toward now. So in terms of collaboration, we had a lot of work coming up, and we had the opportunity to look at outsourcing. And so one of the things we looked at various outsourcing business models, Singapore, India, China, and then other Western countries too. And one of the things we decided to do was do a form of insourcing, which is what Bournemouth is. And so basically what we're doing is we're taking equipment that was kind of reaching at the lower tiers of our technology, and we've built a mini facility down in Bournemouth. And so we're actually capturing students that are coming through there, and then some of them will come on to Framestore, some will go to other places. But it was a really interesting experiment because it was very low cost, it was very easy for us to set up, it was a good partnership. And it really put the idea of what collaboration is between us, where we have a very fixed VFX pipeline, which is very show specific, to having an in-house facility that's located separately, with not a lot of technical support.
Is this something that big companies should do more with media universities? Is it something which you think is a bit of a trend, other people doing the same?
Well, I hope not, because I think we'd like to do it.
You want us to do it? Right, okay. Well, it's a good way for young talent to find their place in the industry as well. Okay, Gavin, sharing jobs in the visual effects business has been a fact of life for the last 20 years. I know, I've read about it hundreds of times. Collaborating to create, though, can cause problems due to the proprietary software that's written to solve so many answers as you go. So can you explain how collaborating to create works in the movie visual effects business, particularly in light of what I just said about proprietary software? And I assume that assets in this context are people, craft skills and technology.
Yes. So I guess when you're working on a huge film these days, you know, it's pretty much impossible to do it all yourself. We do it occasionally, you know, every once in a while something will come along where you sort of say, yes, it makes sense to do 1,000+ shots on this film, but more often than not, you're going to be doing a couple of hundred, another facility is going to be doing a couple of hundred, and more often than not, there's going to be a bit of overlap. So taking a recent example, we've got the likes of the most recent Harry Potter film, where we were working on the end sequence, the Battle of Hogwarts, and so we're NPCs, so we had a lot of crossover there. Something that's probably close to Steve's heart is on Captain America. Framestore were working on Red Skull. They were chopping off his nose, making him look all scary and badass. And we were working on all sorts of other stuff. So we ended up in that situation where Framestore would pass us over the renders, the backplates of the finished element, and we're basically just putting that into our comps. So for example, part of the film, not to give anything away, Red Skull kind of gets a little bit evaporated, and we were doing all of the evaporation effects. And we got the complete renders from Framestore, and then we had to then try and fit it into our pipeline and make it look like, you know, we hit a 3D element that we were able to properly dissolve. And when it comes to that sort of stuff, it sort of, you tend to try and cross the line, whereas like, does it make more sense to ask them for a cache? Like, can they just literally hand us the asset of Red Skull and we just dissolve that mesh away, or should we just try and do it with reprojecting onto our own geometry? Because if you're trying to just work with a raw cache that's already pre-made, you're not able to mess around with it at all. So if you find that the body track isn't quite right, or you'd like to adjust that slightly, it's a lot harder. But obviously they can't share their rigs because they would have a lot of proprietary technology for making their own, you know, characters. So all of that stuff they can't share. So if we just ask for a plain mesh, we're kind of locked into that. So it's a case of, do you rebuild it yourself completely, or do you just try and work with them handing you, you know, a plate element? So when it gets into those situations, it can get very messy, and that's when it really makes sense to sit down at the very beginning and plan it out as well as possible. So in some instances, it'll make sense for one company to do all of the rigging, to create all of the characters, and then just hand over the meshes. In other situations, it'll make sense for both of us to actually create our own version of the character.
Okay, there's one small question for both of you that comes to mind. There's so many digital cameras out there now, and they're not all the same. So when the stuff comes in, because it's not so much, you know, film's still there, you're getting a lot of digital cameras. Do you have problems with the different digital cameras coming into the house? Do you have to make some kind of special way of treating each one? No?
Yeah, I mean, not so much. I guess you do have to set up, you know, for each new camera that comes up, you have to get a full, you know, maybe a colour profile. There's a bit of a lack of standardisation there, where, you know, it would really help to know that the files that are coming in off of these cameras are all consistent, and then obviously different cameras might use different lenses and all of that. But
I think it's probably a lot trickier for the commercials world, because it's a lot more rough and woolly. And so we have a commercials division too, and I see those guys wrestling with all the different camera formats, and then all the different ways those cameras are used. And so, but I mean, I think for the work we tend to do, it tends to be a fixed pipeline. So we know what's coming in, so even if it's something we haven't seen before, we have time to prepare for it.
Yeah, there was one instance where a lot of the London houses were having a conversation at one point about just sharing lens grids. So for every lens that you might shoot with, you know, it's going to have its own distortion profile and so on. And that's not something where there's a competitive advantage in having solved your own lens grid. So with that, there was a bit of a talk about, can we create a library across all the facilities where we just share that, you know, as a particular lens comes in, you just shoot the lens grid and then share it out. Because that's going to save money for all of us, and it's not really going to give you any advantage.
Just following on what Kevin was saying too about collaboration, I think a lot of times you work into capacity. So the shots have already been awarded. So, and a lot of us have worked together before anyway. So once the work's already underway, there's not a lot of competitive advantage in holding something back, unless it's proprietary. So it's easy enough to just say, what can we do to make it easier for you guys, because it's quid pro quo. Okay.
Right, Mike, you collaborate to create for a huge and demanding brand in its industry, Ford, in the automotive business, and you also play a small part within the broadcast facility business. Your perspective is totally multimedia, starting with still images by the thousand, beautiful still images by the thousand. So please talk about how you manage your people and technology to produce such a wide mix of media, and identify, please, what specific ongoing problems you face.
Sure. Well, our relationship with Ford actually dates back 4 decades now, but from the CG perspective, it was realised that about 12 to 15 years ago that CG photorealism really had come of age, and we could actually push the envelope with regard where we could take photographic replacement work and actually put it into brochures. So we started looking towards taking what Burroughs does as its mainstream business, which is produce all the brochures for all the dealerships across pan-Europe in all the different languages, with all the artwork that goes into it. And for quite a few years, we can kind of mint these days these things. We've been cheating quite a lot of you with regard to what's in the brochure, what's real, what's not even been manufactured yet. A lot of that's also been based from ways in which film industry have been pushing technology, and subsequently we've really achieved those kind of tasks off the back of some of that technology push. Managing those assets with regard getting the right people, always a challenge I think for any studio house, anywhere really in the world. The stream of creative talent that seems to be coming out of the UK, and particularly around London, is getting better and better. It's fantastic. As from the perspective very much I'm looking at of the design visualization sector, it's fantastic to see that number of colleges effectively improving the quality of their students and graduates that are is having a direct effect on film and indeed downstream industries such as design viz, commercial work. So it's always a challenge finding people. I think it's getting better though, that's really positive. With regard actually managing assets that I also refer to as 2D, 3D assets, the actual CAD data, we very much are a consumer of vast quantities of data. So with respect to that, we'd normally be a house that perhaps a 3D studio that perhaps would create lots of data. We end up having an unusual problem where we have too much data with regard actually data that's been brought into our system, and we actually need to get rid of lots of that. That is similar in still all businesses with regard too much data to actually process with regard to rendering, but we also have this mammoth task that the initial data that we have, instead of it being modelled, is effectively produced from manufacturing CAD data, so it is modelled but not obviously by us. It's actually reducing that data, working out how the hell we store it, move it around, get it to the right people in a timely fashion.
Is that getting rid of that data an editorial process which you've got to establish so you don't say, oops, I got rid of something I shouldn't have done 2 months down the line? Or?
Absolutely, it becomes what should fundamentally be a really simple idea of producing photographic replacement imageries and animations, broadcast policy kind of work, and replacing lots of photographic elements with CG based on a particular vehicle, when you realise that actually that vehicle has not ever been produced, that particular series, that vehicle line, that particular trip and spec, and the lovely idea that all the options that you get for all vehicle lines don't necessarily go to all markets, and there's 30 or 40 markets. The complexity very quickly goes into the millions. Delivering that together with the fact that Ford, like many automotive manufacturers, are a continuous design process of vehicles and iterations every 4 years approximately is a design cycle, and every 2 hours the data or a small amount of that data is changing, and that's remote to us, and we need to feed into that data, make a decision as to what amount of that data, those assets, we actually need to take into account, because from a creative standpoint, and brochure images, for example, if an engineer changes 1 bolt from 6mm to 8mm, you're not going to see it. But I've probably just had a terabyte worth of data change on me, and then my backup system blows up because I can't back up that data because it's changed, it's flagged, and the system has changed.
I did a story once about Tony the Tiger from Sugar Frosties, and the ad agency got in trouble because they discovered that Tony the Tiger looked different in 20 realms around the world, and the brand said, well, why? You just produce Tony the Tiger and just send them out to everybody. So brand working is really, really, a very, very tough work. I was quite surprised when I discovered that Double Negative has 1,000 people facing screens in London. And I was also surprised they had 100 more in Singapore. So let's move on to issues around scale and how different companies respond to growth. And we'll start with Steve. Can you kick off? Because I know you've thoughts about vertical and horizontal scaling. The bigger is better approach you identified, maybe against something you prefer. The hard fact is that where companies had 20 machines 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, we are now talking multiples in terabytes. So you respond.
So we just faced this recently within the past 6 months or so, where we had a very large project that we could have been awarded. And that project, 1 film would have doubled the size of our facility. And the decision was made, as much as people wanted to work on that film, that it would conflict with work that we had in-house. And so we had to make the decision, do we double and become a big company, which is a quite regular thing to do, or do we stay the size we are? And I think a lot of the decision to turn down that work was based on the fact that we're doing a lot of horizontal scaling. So where we're putting our time in is we've got an art department that's been running for about a year now. We've got 6 to 8 concept artists working full-time in their own environment, working directly with the studios and the directors and the producers on films that haven't even been made yet. They're films that are being pitched. And sometimes we're contributing to the pitch. So we have that. We've just recently, within the past 6 weeks, announced a deal with Third Floor, which are a big previous company. They were George Lucas's previous company in Los Angeles. And so we're bringing that technology that they have, which is quite advanced and quite fast, for developing the visual storyboards, which in a lot of ways is driving the way the cameras are set up in films. So it's again, very, very creative part of filmmaking. And so we're building up these departments, and probably the other interesting areas, we've got a capture department, which started out as mocap for a particular film that we're working on, funded by the studios, and now is basically expanded to cover all aspects of data capture on set. So we have witness cameras, we can capture motion, we can capture light. So we're capturing everything that happens on set, and that's become a separate department on itself. So I think a lot of where we're putting our energy is into that, and then we're keeping the core VFX, which is traditional VFX, about the same size. I mean, we're going to our full capacity, and we have scaled our machine resources quite considerably. We've got a lot more storage and a lot more processing power.
Yes, you prefer horizontal to vertical in scaling, that's right. Yeah?
Yeah, and then within horizontally pull everything up to a level.
Up to the level, right, okay. Gavin, the Singapore facility, it was open for match moving, roto and other prep work. How was that boosted in terms of infrastructure, scale and capability for what it can do now, which is handling or sharing full jobs?
Yeah, so I guess initially when we were sending work across to Singapore, it was always a known thing that you could plan for. You know you're going to have a certain amount of shots that are going over. You need to send over the plates, they need to do the work, and then they send back, you know, something as simple as a scene file or, you know, some roto elements or whatever. So it was always a known thing in terms of how much data was going back and forth. So, you know, managing that kind of pipeline was relatively easy. It was relatively fixed, the amount of stuff going back and forth. The only times you might get a little bump is if you've got a stereo IMAX project and you need to send over these massive plates, then suddenly bandwidth becomes more of an issue. But generally speaking, that sort of work it's very easy to manage back and forth because there's less creative, you know, to and fro. It's more sort of you send it over, they know what they're doing, they get the work done, and they send it back. And then recently, as the team over there has kind of matured and got a lot better, we haven't really expanded the crew all that much over there. It's still, I guess, a relatively small facility, but the work that they're able to do in terms of the complexity, you know, they're doing their own 3D asset creation, they're doing their own rendering and lighting and compositing and all of this stuff. It then becomes a bit more about having the teams collaborate together so that they're actually creatively able to sort of pick up the phone or video conference with each other and talk about what needs to be doing, so that it's not a case of constantly having to send data back and forth. It's more a case of you know, communicating back and forth the creative brief, so that when you do have to send massive assets back, for example, if they create a very complex, you know, say a car model, something like that, it's not something that they want to be sending all the time because, you know, it's going to choke up the pipes. So if they're able to just kind of present rendered images and then you give feedback on that, then when it's finally done, you get the finished product, and then it makes a lot more sense in terms of managing, you know, the sort of broadband side of things.
Coincidentally, just one quick question. When you're getting an OK from clients nowadays, you know, we used to, you know, wonder people going to look at things. There's just some, you know, are we now using iPads and various things for OKs for shots, by the way?
It's becoming more and more common, yeah, especially on set.
Oh, for OKs, yeah, right. Okay. Because I just wonder, because I've been, you know, a colourist and a colour map person for the past film industry. I worry about these things. Okay, Mike. How would you face scaling upwards in terms of what you do technically and finding the extra talent? Having the big corporate clients must give you spillover quality advantages for what you do in the broadcast industry. What is it exactly you do for the solo companies, and can you comment on that previously, you know, finding the extra talent, which you've already done partly, and do big corporate clients give you spillover quality?
Yes, they do. As I said previously, we've experienced a lot of staff coming from perhaps from film, from commercials, who perhaps want to just actually not necessarily step down, but step sideways, I consider it, and look at the visualization world. We've also seen an awful lot of people move from college going to architectural visualization studios, and that tends to lend itself quite well to kind of the accuracy level, the kind of work we're looking at with regard ensuring that we don't have too many disclaimers that we have to stick everywhere with regard to the quality of the imagery, to ensure it's on brand and on brief, and it's effectively product correct, which is one of the biggest challenges for us. Consolidating the data, allowing us to place devices closer to the edge of our networks, so that we can actually pull data in a more efficient manner. Technologies like virtualization, and indeed automotive manufacturers like Ford, Mazda, Land Rover, McLaren, who move more towards actually using other technology themselves to consolidate their data centres around the world has allowed us to make sure that our tunnels are in the right place at the right time, so we can move large quantities of data around without it becoming a complete nightmare for us to then actually push those to the correct places for the artists to actually use.
Okay, let's pedal on to individual questions now because time's flying by. So a question for all of you. One of the things that you all oversee is the flow of huge streams of data between buildings, between departments. How convinced are you by the promise of cloud computing? What changes does it imply for your workflows and for cost savings? Do you want to start off on that one, cloud computing?
What is cloud?
What does it imply for your workflows?
Posh word for the internet, and internet does things for you.
Well, on the consumer side, you've got iCloud, and the consumer side is pretty well set up. But cloud computing, you know, has been around for 4 or 5 years, but it was certainly one of the biggest discussions at IBC. And what you tended to see was old asset management systems and things that weren't necessarily aimed for media management in the cloud. They were for pre-programming for other things. So there are lots of questions about it. So if you've got a quick thought on it, we'll buzz around on that one.
Sure. I won't tackle the actual compute on farm kind of cloud, but I will say that with regard to kind of the world of virtualization and kind of web server technologies, it's fantastic to actually look at moving more local virtualized kind of local cloud kind of technologies and move them more out-house and move them more to places which can provide a much greater redundancy, much greater pipes into them. So with regard more kind of production tracking or asset management or actual deliverable web applications, whatever platform they may be on more kind of web server clustering kind of technologies, it does make perfect sense to move those more onto this internet thing.
Okay,
so cloud compute.
Okay, ground compute. Ground control to Major Tom. There he is.
I mean, I think for probably the past year, we've been kind of slowly ticking off things that have been barriers. I mean, for us, it's just a remote render farm. That's really what it comes down to. Okay. And that's been around for 10 years or so. There's been people trying to do it, but there's always been a barrier. There's been licenses, there's been storage, there's been transport costs, all that. But I think it's all fallen by the wayside. And we make a tremendous investment in capital equipment. We spend millions and millions of pounds on computers and storage. And if we could get one of our partners to spend that money and we can turn it on when we need to, I think that makes sense for us. So, I mean, from my perspective, we keep 80% of what we need in-house. And so we still have quite a significant computing capacity, but then we do the overflow stuff, the stuff that kind of kills your budget through somebody else. And whether that's Dell or IBM or HP, it kind of doesn't matter because we virtualize the machines, and the main thing for us is the rendering licenses, software costs, and we've got that cracked also with the site license.
Okay.
I guess we haven't really taken that step yet. We're still relying on our in-house render farm. And it can occasionally become a bit of a tricky situation where everyone's trying to get a project out at once, and that can come down to more planning, just to making sure that the work that's flowing through the facility is well produced and well managed in terms of not having to do all of your work in the last possible week and finding the render farm is full and you can't get it all out. And I think for us the main barrier to actually just being able to send that out to the cloud, it's basically the amount of data we need to transfer. If we're doing a project with massive explosions, the data sets involved are just ginormous, and to actually be able to send that out, if you're doing a simulation by day and then you want it to be rendered by the following morning, the actual time to transfer all that data across is, it's phenomenal. So that's the main barrier to us. As soon as all the pipes are big enough to transport this stuff fairly transparently, so hitting sim and getting a render back is as easy to do in terms of it leaving the building and happening somewhere else, and compared to doing it in-house, that's when we'll probably take a more serious look at things. But so far, it is just a case of managing all of your licenses and making sure that you've got capacity to do it and that you're not going to hit any spikes. That's kind of how we've been managing it.
Okay.
I should add just real quickly. We're not using the cloud. We don't do that at the moment. We've got everything in place for it.
Right.
All of our stuff is in-house too, because that's where the majority of the work is. You need to control.
Oh yeah, I've just done some big interviews on cloud computing where people think they're big at this, and I want to use two things that stick to mind. The Rolling Stones had it right, get off my cloud. And then there was passing cloud, the cigarettes, those purple oval ones. I want to involve them somehow in the graphic when I do the article. Right, okay, so let's progress fast. Can all three of you talk a little bit about how you get the best from your clients? They're trying to get the best from you. How do you get the best from your clients?
Listen.
Yeah, listen.
Listen carefully, and a lot of planning. a lot of thinking about their problems before they arrive, and then a lot of preparation. And for us, a lot of it is, one of the things that, and I'm sure it's the same double negative, there's a culture of communication. So internally, there's a real high-touch level of communication among the different departments and what people are doing. And so we meet regularly, we go to coffees, we do a lot of stuff that might not seem directly attributable to work, but it keeps the rhythm of what's happening and who's coming in. So we always know long in advance what's happening. And I think part of that horizontal spread of having an art department, having the third floor, having the capture being on set, gives us a lot of visibility to what's coming. And so it gives us a good chance to set and prep.
So it's the rhythm of life.
It's, it's communication, prep time, education of the client, perhaps, is a polite way of putting it sometimes. Also review, ensuring that no matter what time zone you're operating in, we've got 4 offices around the world, ensuring that we have reviews in the right time zones and actually allow the clients to feel like they're in control of their jobs as well. Sometimes it can feel like this whole CG thing, it just goes out of hand really. It goes in this box and comes out and you get what you get. And, they need more control, they deserve more control than that. But sometimes they do need to back off and be flexible and listen to perhaps when some of their ideas are a little bit beyond reality.
Yeah, I'd second all of the communication kind of points. Again, talking about a recent film on Captain America, we had an effect where when the baddies shoot their guns, a little blue flash comes out. And we knew that we were designing this effect from the very beginning, but we also knew that it was going to be done by many, many facilities because it didn't make sense for us to try and do all of the boot bolts and the whole film, because then we would have had to get all the scans for all of the shots and so on. So really we had to collaborate with the client at the beginning to establish the look of the thing, so that we could then tell all these other facilities, this is what it looks like, this is the behaviour, these are the rules for how it works. And then for them, it came down to them letting us know, well, we can't rebuild this, we don't have the technology, you've done it all through all sorts of crazy in-house Houdini tricks, we don't run Houdini and so on. So with some of them we were able to plan in advance, okay, we'll look at the sequences and we can sort of say, we'll just deliver you elements, we'll just give you this bolt against black and then you can just do it as a pure comp thing. And when they're doing it that way, it became a lot easier for them to turn things around, and the client was able to then plan which shots are going to which facilities, and they knew then there was one facility in particular where they reckoned they'll be able to rebuild this in 3D. These guys are kick-ass Houdini guys, and you know, we basically sent a little quick time where we talked through our network and explained how it all worked, and sent that over. And so we weren't actually sharing any of our proprietary technology, we were just saying this is how it works. And then this other facility in Australia was able to rebuild it themselves, and then the client was able to art direct them in specific ways to tweak the look of it for those shots. So in that sort of situation, you know, it's all about, if you can get them to sign off on an image at the very beginning, if you can concept it up and paint it and say, this is what it is, then everyone can begin the work. But if it's more involved and it needs to have a lot of 3D input to it, then it's really about planning the timings of when can you actually deliver, you know, the final product for everyone to then start working around and matching to.
Okay, let's move on. I was at a meeting of Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers with a lot of the major people, because we had a standards discussion about a thing called FIMS, which is coming into workflow, and I was at that meeting, and there were people from studios and all sorts of companies, and I asked a question. I said, is there any area of the media at the moment that doesn't need a quantum leap in terms of innovation? And nobody answered. They all said, you're right. Every single area in the industry does need a quantum leap in terms of innovation. So you three, what quantum leap in terms of innovation and new technology areas do you want to see?
I'll jump on. I think the open source movement, in terms of, you know, everyone collaborating on, you know, OpenEXR was the first real success story where everyone said, from the visual effects standpoint, this is what we want an image format to be. And we're making more inroads into now having 3D file formats like Alembic, which is a big effort from ImageWorks and ILM. You know, they're coming up with a file format where it'll allow for proper interchange of data between facilities, which will make all of the sharing stuff a lot easier. You know, you will be able to collaborate more in terms of being able to share more than just a basic cache. You'll be able to, you know, share more of the methodology of how you're doing things. So if everyone can get on board with that stuff, then at least you've got a common language so that you are able to kind of send things back and forth a lot easier and not have to reinvent the wheel all the time yourselves.
Okay.
Interop, communication between different companies in the industry, and standardisation as well. Gavin mentioned the idea of transferring lens data for distortions, but the idea that perhaps companies, smaller companies indeed, design viz sector, different architectural viz companies can group together, standardise perhaps on their workflows, but still have their unique creativities and their talents, but move more things slightly out of house. Perhaps cloud computing may provide a partnership kind of relationship there, but the idea of interop and standardisation would be really good. The kind of the concept of perhaps actually working from home and the computers and network and the internet and everything is just beyond anything we can imagine right now. So you can sit at home in your pants with your computer doing 3D. Nah, who wants to do that? That's a bit sad. You want to work in a studio. You want to have great people working around you.
I'd say probably one of the areas that I think has progressed most slowly is UI design. And so the way that we do art right now, it's not changed very much in 5 years, 10 years. And so I think the way that artists interact with the computers is still fairly primitive. And so we haven't taken advantage of new I/O devices, new ways to create. I think it's starting to happen, but it's got a lot of room for improvement. Boringly, power and refrigeration. Anybody who runs a big facility in Soho past a certain scale knows how painful and expensive it is, and those technologies. And it's also it's crap for being green. You're sucking down a whole city block worth of power just to do a sequence, and that doesn't make anybody feel really good.
Okay. Before I ask a little suite of questions at the end, and then we open it up to the audience, you mentioned a standard. Okay, now standards are very important. So I can ask a couple of questions. How many people in the audience have ever heard of AS11 as a standard that's coming in? No? Okay, well, any broadcaster who makes a program and delivers it to a broadcaster, as of 2012, will have to use an MFX subset and a codec, an ABC codec, which BBC, Channel 4, and all the companies are going to put out there. So every delivery of a program has to come in on that. How many people here have heard of FIMS? Okay, FIMS version 1 is now out, going to standardisation at 70. It basically is crucial to workflow, so it's worth looking it up. Look it up on the EBE website if you're interested in workflows. And then I won't go into any others because there's quite a few coming around, so keep your eye on standards that are coming up that are going to affect the business. Right, so the last suite of questions before we open up. Mike, I spoke to two guys from Blue Arc who might have spoken with us, and one of them listed an explosion of unstructured data as one of the big issues with his customers. This implies a need for software features to manage that data. Is this typically what you might look at in your R&D?
Absolutely. I've kind of hinted towards that already.
Yeah.
Moving more things, because this is, again, kind of an interesting kind of concept of moving more things very as far as you can to the edge of your local networks, and indeed moving more things to kind of a WAN kind of cloud environment, so that perhaps from my perspective, the incoming quantity of data that I have to deal with, actually being able to not have to bring that too close to me, but actually deal with it a little bit at arm's length in the cloud or somewhere else, another remote dense data center, which then allows me to effectively put a middleman in between, allows me to manage those things a lot more effectively.
Okay.
I'd throw out that Mike was speaking earlier too. That I think this whole thing about data, big data is our biggest problem right now, because there's so many tools and everybody's scripting and everybody's writing software to automatically create data or procedurally create data or data from the source. And I think that for the one time out of the thousands that the removal of a piece of data causes a problem, there's a much more persistent problem, which is data that's created and accessed one or less times. And we crawl our file systems all the time. We know there's a lot of data that's created that's never returned to. And it sits there, and because of the pressures of production and the pressure on the artist to turn around images, there's not a lot of attention given to removing the data until it becomes a problem. So until you hit a threshold. But at that point, then it's kind of like, oh, they'll do what needs to be done. But with the way technology is going, that threshold gets higher and higher, and then the ability to find the data to delete just becomes a massive problem.
And then you get into this horrible scenario where you're increasing the actual storage levels and your clustered NAS and SAN, and then you're asking the questions, well, I can't get to it quick enough, so you're then accelerating it, and you then put in a cluster environment above that, which actually then accelerates in solid state and RAM, and then you get into this world of, oh, I've still got all that data, and still don't know how to get rid of it.
Got a question for you, because we're going to move on. Gavin, what's the bigger business at the moment, 2D to 3D conversion or stereoscopic 3D shot natively?
For us, it's been 2D. Well, we haven't done too much 2D, 3D conversion ourselves, but most of the projects that we've been working on has been more of the post-converted stuff. I don't think we've done a single project that's been shot natively in stereo. The only time that we get involved in doing full stereo stuff ourselves is if we've got fully CG shots, then it makes sense for us to render it and comp it and do the full thing ourselves, so that we're not having to send it out to someone else. So with a lot of the shots that have been shot and are going to be post-converted, all it does for us is just creates another, compresses the schedule basically, where we're no longer the people at the end of the chain. We've now got someone else that has to do some stuff after we're finished. So it's kind of affecting our schedules and our ability to kind of nudge deadlines when we really have to. We have to really plan around delivering when we're meant to deliver, which is a bit of a pain. But yeah, in terms of creating our own fully stereoscopic 3D elements, there's been a lot of R&D done into methods to do that effectively. With all our in-house software, we've got our own custom renderers and so on. They need to be extended to work with stereo. So there's been a huge amount of work that we've had to do in that area, and judging by audience's reactions, it's not always appreciated. I don't think people are really actually screaming for stereo.
The more stereoscopic 3D you have, and then comes 4K, you're going to have heaps load more data to worry about, aren't you? Heaps.
Yeah, but the resolution's not the problem. Mm-hmm. So working at big resolutions, that's what the technology is designed to do. It's the efficiency. Mm-hmm. It's when people keep 25 versions of something until somebody tells them that they can't create a 26 until they remove. That's the real challenge.
Okay, right, now we've not mentioned security. Now, everybody is secure-minded, but in a conversation with you, you suggested it's a perception issue more than a real threat. We can lock down subnets and secure pathways from a technical perspective, but the buck stops where? So can you all answer that? Where does the buck stop in terms of security?
Well, I think from our perspective, we have a security policy that governs our actions anyway, and that's a pretty strict security policy in terms of data coming in and out, and everybody pretty much understands it. I think the challenge for us is to communicate that to studios. So when we deal with studios who are very sensitive, especially when we're getting in very early in the project, and there's a lot of IP attached to it, some of the IP we may be generating, then it's our responsibility to communicate them. And the studios all have security people who are very clued up. And so we get digital audits. We got guys that come in, they get on our network, they have a look at how we do things. There's physical audits, they check doors, they check locks. It's pretty serious.
Data over and above that, yeah, absolutely. It's exactly the same kind of situations for us for compliance, for various industry standards, as well as indeed a complete layer of interesting complexity that we have with automotive manufacturers who are indeed very, very sensitive that they're totally unreleased, fully ready to manufacture CAD data sets don't appear on a computer in China, which has happened. So they want full tracking, working out exactly where all this has gone, but it's also the complexity of data retention as well. A conversation quite a few years ago with regard actually, well, how long should we look after this data for you post-project, post-show. In film it's relatively easy to say, right, let's push all that to archive. If a part of that show or sequel comes on, we can handle that, we know what stuff to come back with. In a similar matter, with our data sets, we know that, for example, a car will have a facelift in its life cycle. We know how long that will take. And one manufacturer was asking us to actually only hold the data retention less time than the facelift would be. So effectively, we would do a job for them, and before the subsequent sequel job comes up, they wanted us to delete all their data and all the work that we'd done for them. So we'd have to charge them all over again.
Nice one.
And yeah, we've got a lot of the same issues. I mean, if we're building a particular environment for a particular studio for a particular film, they actually do own that data, and they do take it quite seriously. We had for one particular film, we modelled St. Peter's Square in Rome, Vatican City, and another project came up that belonged to that studio, and they asked for us to reuse that asset, and that was fine. And then a couple of years later, they had a different facility working on it, and they said, "Can you dig that out and send it to us again?" And we had to go back, trawl through our asset system, get it restored and get it in such a state that we could actually send it over. And it's something that they pretty much expected us to be able to do was to still look after this data, safeguard it, and then send it on as required. And it becomes a bit funny where you create all of these assets, and the number of times you might have modelled a particular car, for example, sometimes it makes sense to remodel it, other times you sort of think, oh well, I'll just reuse that. But actually, maybe you shouldn't reuse it because it might have belongs to a different studio. So if you work on a Marvel film, create a particular fighter jet, and then another studio asks you to put that same fighter jet into a movie, technically you shouldn't do it. So from that point of view, you have to kind of make sure that you're playing by the rules and that you are, not going to abuse, couldn't take any shortcuts unnecessarily.
Okay, well, it's time for all of you sitting there to think if you've got a question. I've got one more which I was going to ask them, but I think time now requires that we open up to you. And can you do a yippee or something if you're in the darkest bit? If you don't, I've got one question they can all jig round which is going to affect a lot of you. I'll do it very quick. Can you touch on the influence of software people who move around and fertilise the ideas in the industry by doing so? There's no hand up.
Soho's pretty unique.
Yeah.
And I think that's the great, it was built by J.K. Rowling, because before her, there wasn't a big film industry here. There was a modest film industry. And then the Potter films have been a continuous, steady salary stream. And so they provided a path in for so many people, and the explosive growth from 15 to 1,100 for like double negative. And I was reading a book called The Talent Code, and they talk about how talent is born and where these hothouse places are. And definitely in the film industry for visual effects, Soho's a hothouse. That's what I say. It's a hothouse because you got so many people. We could be working together in a month, and then not see each other for 2 years, and then work together again. And it's and also not only is it the physical proximity of the facilities, but it's also the social proximity. So the pubs that everybody goes to, the coffee shops, people keep in touch with each other. There's the social news groups, and there's so many different ways. So secret sauce floats around anyway, because it goes around in the personnel.
Yeah, what used to make me laugh way back was when a lot of facilities would be bidding on the same project, and you just know that whichever facility actually lands the project, the same people are going to end up getting hired for that show. So really, realistically, it doesn't matter where the work goes, it's going to be the same people who are going to do it. It's not the case now because we've been trying very hard to hold on to people because our people are our number one asset. They're the ones who know everything about the rest of the team, and the collaboration, the efficiencies you gain from knowing the rest of your team are far greater than just being able to say it could be any 100 people doing the show. You can perform so much better by having a team that knows each other, so we try and retain staff as much as possible, and that's kind of how we keep things efficient.
Okay, we have a question. Could you introduce yourself, please, and ask your question?
Yeah, hello, my name is Michael, I'm a filmmaker. You guys all work on the top end of the game. What I'm interested in is all the assets that have been created, for your clients. Is there any effort or any ideas around to, make these accessible in libraries for people and companies who work on a lower level than you, so that you can actually access this, whether it be Creative Commons or still the IP protected and licensees fees paid for it, because that would be quite handy for people who, work on a lower level to users.
We're happy just to make it available to our own people.
Yeah, I get that. No, that's the thing. A lot of the time we don't own it, and there would be security issues around, releasing a particular asset. But I think one thing that we do try and encourage is that you've got companies like, say, TurboSquid, these companies that they take models from people, they crowdsource basically. Anyone can send in models. If they're any good, people can pay for it. So we could pay for it. The most low-end company, a single person in the bedroom, if it's going to save them a lot of time, they can pay for it. And what we're trying to do with them is kind of establish best practices so that that the models you're going to be getting from them are actually solid. So we might have, different checklists. So say if we're going to be paying some money for a particular model, then it would be nice to know it's going to work in our pipeline. So with that, you try and establish some standards and make sure that it'll be good enough, and then everyone can benefit.
I'm just picking up from that. I'm aware about models being around and meshes. One thing that is particularly interesting is environments. Like if you said you had to be modeled and rendered on Peter Square, and similar stuff. Basically like studio sets being reused, physical sets being reused for different shows. I don't know if it would be nice. I'm saying, it's just a dream, things like that. Wait.
Okay, thank you. Question here. Thank you very much. Good question. Thank you.
I'm Chris from Sony PlayStation. You asked a question earlier on about technology you'd like to see from vendors and what have you. Is there a particular piece of tech that you think's hot right now, or dare I say that you're excited by?
I mean, I'm a geek, so I'm really excited by what's happening with big data and analytics. And all the data that we generate, being able to understand the nature of that data and how it affects what we're creating is really important. The movement of the data, the creation of the data, the life cycle of the data, that's all really bleeding edge. And I think that over the next couple of years, I mean, it's not necessarily for this industry. If you're just talking about technology, but I think that's going to be the big thing in technology. What Google is doing applied to everything. So, sorry, did that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm interested in kind of sort of the analytics, but also the idea that we can prolong because sort of the wants of customers. Say, for example, a vehicle owner, to prolong the life cycle of our databases for a lot of our web and our digital services. I've talked a lot about kind of the CG kind of areas of our business, but an awful lot of our digital offerings all work in partnership, or effectively kind of like we try to provide complete above and below the line in-house digital agency solutions. So conceptually, the idea that owners of vehicles in the future who want to be more green want to keep their vehicles potentially because they are built to last longer as well, may want to look up, say, a particular spec or the service manual for a particular vehicle that they've owned for 10 years. They want to do that on a platform that doesn't even, a mobile platform that doesn't even exist yet. How do we ensure that we've got the database and kind of possible technology so we can offer up those solutions in the future, prolonging the life of our databases, which then hook into effectively our data systems. I think it's quite interesting to kind of see and monitor trends of car owners, for example, around the world. Different countries are literally using cars kind of in a completely different way. South America tend to have one mentality for how they sell and buy their vehicles, whereas Europeans are completely different as well.
Yeah, I think just a completely different tack. Some of the recent stuff that's coming out in terms of crowdsourcing and some of the software that's becoming available to end users is really exciting. I think Autodesk have a product, PhotoFly, where you can just take any snaps and it'll create a 3D object, fully textured object. And that's something that we've been working on in-house. We had systems to do that, and all of a sudden it's just out there, and millions of people are doing it. And that just opens up all these possibilities for, you can have people all around the world sharing photographs and sharing, building up environments where they can actually be built in 3D and anyone can get in and take that data and do stuff with it. So the creative possibilities are opening wide up in terms of, what can be done when millions and millions of people around the world can collaborate on all of these new systems. So that's really quite exciting.
I'll answer the question. Do you know Mark Grenier? Grenier from Sony PlayStation?
I don't actually.
Oh, right,
I should know.
Well, Sony Broadcast, they have PlayStations which they've modified, they're really well. But I'll make a comment. At IBC there wasn't that much new, it's the biggest broadcasting show in Europe. But what was new, what I referred to earlier, was the whole issue of can standards catch up with the speed that the market's moving at. That is the big issue for me at the moment. And 3 organisations, the most key thing that happened in September this year, the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, the European Broadcasting Union, and AMRO, which is a workforce body, joined forces to work together on speeding up software standards in the future. So to me, that was the key thing that happened in the last 3 or 4 months. Right, one last question, then we...
Can I just take one
sorry.
stab at that?
Yeah.
Because the PlayStation, one thing is we're capturing so much data around our environment right now. So when I say big data, what I mean by that is everything's going to be real. So the response, like for games, when you're playing a game now, we see it already in some of the car games where you get the car is accurate, the racetrack is accurate. That's going to increase and increase. It's going to infiltrate every part of our society. That's going to be what data is about for us. It's going to be how we act with the world.
And I'm quite interested in the way you've answered that question. I was actually looking for perhaps you identifying a particular piece of tech, a hot product from a tangible vendor right now. I know you're all companies that probably develop some of your own in-house tech as well. I guess it's all about the combination of different technology from different vendors to approach different problems. But I wondered if there was you are going to pick out a particular product right now that's come to market that you're very excited by?
The Sony 4K camera.
Well, of course.
And to create some balance, the Xbox Kinect it's been funny to see that actually being taken up on film sets where people are just using that to scan sets. It's something that it wasn't designed for that purpose, but all of a sudden people are just repurposing it, and they're able to, instead of doing this big elaborate capture process we would have done before, people are actually able to just take a Kinect and just scan it. So weird little things like that are quite funny.
Right, last question, and then we'll say our thanks to the speakers.
I've been hearing quite a lot about integrated advertising, where you might watch a piece of film and the objects have been sold separately, so that the cornflakes will go from Kellogg's to Tesco's, depending on who's paying. Do you see that as being the way forward for advertising?
Do you want to make a comment?
Tricky.
Tricky one, yeah.
Maybe. It's prediction in the future. It's always that crystal ball mentality. I think I'd actually go back to the previous question and answer it with the secret sauce to all our technology and how we go about our business. Our secret is our people. So I'd handle your question in a similar way and answer it with, if the market dictates that and trends go towards that kind of area, then we would find a solution that we could offer up that we would be happy with offering to our clients.
If you look at the 97, 67 TV spots at the moment, they're staying up very well against web ads, but they will start to use new tactics because the web ads don't have quite the credence that broadcast ones do with the big audiences. So advertising is something maybe we could, if they do another conference next year, we could do something in that area. Okay? Right, well thank you very much. Could you all please put your hands together and thank these guys, Steve, Gavin and Mike. One thing I would say, tonight on TV there is Scott Free's film Life in a Day, which if you're interested in putting a movie together from 8,000 clips is worth seeing, and then reading up about it on the web, because it's, I did a huge feature about it when it was made, and I'm looking forward to seeing it because I didn't go and see it at the film festivals or anything. So look it up on the web before you look at TV tonight. See if you want to see Life in a Day and see how it was made, because that is the way many of you can make movies in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.